Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Agis Roy Normanov, and you can call me Ronov. I'm from High School 1 Sumenep, and this is
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nashwa Asmi Chandrakanti and you can call me Nashwa. I'm from High School 1 Sumenep. Thank you.
Okay, I will presentation about our work. The title is Comparison of Resistant Starch Content and Physicochemical Condition in Fried Rice, Uduk Rice, and Yellow Rice.
The third largest country that produces the most rice in the world. Indonesia has abundant natural resources, especially in the agricultural sector with rice as the main commodity. In 2018, rice production in Indonesia reached 83,037 billion tons. Central Statistic Agency 2019 then continued at the second point, where this number placed Indonesia as the third largest country producing the most rice in the world. With the large amount of rice production in Indonesia, this commodity plays a role as staple food, consumed by the majority of Indonesia's population every day as carbohydrate intake. The population of the state of Indonesia in 2014 was 252,162,789 people, which has an overall national consumption level of 21,340,032,253.61 kilograms per year, and this need will continue to increase. Indonesia now has the largest per capita rice consumption in the world. Every Indonesian person consumes about 89 kilograms of rice per year. January and Afsari 2016. So how can obesity be so dangerous? Obesity is defined as an abnormal or excessive accumulation of fat that poses a risk to health, namely as a major risk factor for a number of chronic diseases, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Previously, this disease was only considered a problem in high-income countries. However, obesity is currently increasing drastically in low and middle-income countries, especially in urban areas. WHO 2020, Indonesia is obese by 15.4%. The prevalence of obesity in adult women greater 18 years has increased by 18.1% from 2007, 13.9% to 32.9%, where Surabaya is the city with the most prevalence of the population experiencing obesity, and central obesity in East Java, namely amounted to 27.3% and 39.2%. Then what is the one of the cause of obesity? The cause of obesity due to eating rice can occur because rice is loaded with starch, 1.6 ounce per glass, which is normally hydrolyzed by enzymes in the digestive tract to be converted from carbohydrates to glucose, which cells use directly to produce energy for their metabolic function. However, when there is more fuel available than the energy required by cells, excess calories from starch are stored in the body as polysaccharide carbohydrates, called glycogen, to be reused later by converting them back into glucose as needed. The problem is that excess glucose that is not converted to glycogen ends up turning into fat. Therefore, long-term overeating coupled with a lack of proper exercise or an inactive lifestyle can potentially lead to several health problems such as obesity. The previous researchers tried to solve the problem of increasing obesity prevalence by finding food-based solution. Using a special heating cooling regimen, using a special heating and cooking regimen, the scientists concluded that if the best rice varieties were processed it will reduce calories by about 50 to 60%. Calories can be reduced by increasing the content of resistant starch, a non-caloric substance that is not hydrolyzed in the small intestine and does not contribute to an increase in blood glucose. The researchers found a solution that the content of resistant starch in a food can be increased by repeated heating and cooling cycles. However, Indonesia has many methods of processing rice as a staple food, which technically also utilize the heating cooling cycle method. Heating cooling cycle methods such as fried rice. Not only that, there are other rice processing methods that take advantage of natural chemical process such as adding coconut milk in making uduk rice and applying yellow coloring to yellow rice. This is study aims to compare the resident starch from rice as the staple food of Indonesian society with various traditional process consisting of processing such as red rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice using the heating cooling cycle method. Researchers here are trying to test what types of Indonesian food have the highest and how big is the concentration of resistant starch in traditional foods in Indonesia. The heating and cooling treatment or heating cooling cycle is given to various types of rice that are most often consumed by the Indonesian people, namely fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, and uduk rice and yellow rice. Each type of rice is divided into three heating cooling cycle treatments with different cooling process, namely newly cooked, room temperature, and refrigerator temperature. In the newly cooked treatments, newly cooked rice is cooled by a fan while stirring, then tested. At room temperature treatment, the cooked rice was then stirred and cooled and at room temperature for 12 hours and then tested. In the refrigerator temperature treatment, the cooked rice was then stirred, then cooled at room temperature for 12 hours, then cooled again in refrigerator for 12 hours and finally tested. Each treatment was further divided into two groups, namely without reheating or heating cooling cycle one time, and reheating or heating cooling cycle two times. In the second group, rice that has been cooled with first treatment and reheated and cooled by exposure to a fan while stirring, then tested so that this treatment undergoes two heating cooling cycles. By comparing the resistant starch content in rice with forest cooking methods, it can be seen which cooking methods can effectively reduce calories in rice, so that by carrying out this research, is it is hoped that Indonesian people can apply this cooking method to their daily consumption so that it can reduce the prevalent rate of obesity. Formulation of the problem. What is the comparison of the resistant starch content in the types of fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, and uduk rice and yellow rice? Number 2. What is the effect? What is the effect of the cooling process on the resistant starch content of fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice? Number 3. How does the amount of heating cooling cycle affect the content of resistant starch in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice? Number 4. What is the physicochemical process that occurs in the formation of resistant starch in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice? Research purpose. Knowing the ratio of resistant starch content in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. Number 2. Knowing the effect of the cooling process on the content of resistant starch in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. Number 3. Knowing the effect of the amount of heating cooling cycle on the content of resistant starch in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. Number 4. Knowing the physicochemical process that occur in the formation of resistant starch in fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. Novelty. The novelty of this research is to prove that fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice actually contain fewer calories than white rice by testing to determine the resistant starch content in the 5 types of dishes.
Okay, and next slide. Part methodology, research methods. Research design. So the sample of the 5 types of food, namely flavored rice, dried rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice, that have been prepared are treated according to the 6 types of treatment available, which are then tested by the standard testing method. The test carried out is the resistant starch content test based on the AOAC 2000 2002.02 method and the AAC 20003240 method. The test was carried out in 3 repetitions so that a total of 90 values of resistant starch will be obtained. The data obtained were then compared with flavored rice and as control and analyzed so that the difference in the content of resistant starch in each type of food could be found. This research was conducted following the flow chart as follows.
Then the steps that we do in research procedure are as follows. For the sample preparation, each sample of 50 grams was cooked based on the cooking method of flavored rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. The rice used in this study was not rice whose ingredient had been enriched or engineered. In cooking fried rice and dry rice, the prepared 50 grams of rice is placed in a rice cooker and 125 milliliter of water is added and cooked until the water is completely absorbed. In cooking fried rice, the rice is placed in rice cooker in the amount of 50 gram in 125 milliliter of water and cooked until the added water is completely absorbed. The rice is fried by heating on the stove with mixed herbs and spice cooked in palm oil. For the uduk rice and yellow rice, both of them use different herbs and spice but have the same cooking method. So 50 gram of rice each is placed in a rice cooker and cooked with spice and 125 milliliter coconut milk until the added coconut milk is completely absorbed. Then for the cooling process, there are 3 types of cooling applied to each sample, where for each time of cooling there are 2 types of variation, namely 1 heating cooling cycle and 2 heating cooling cycle. So there are a total of 6 treatments applied to the sample of flavored rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. And then for the test of the content of resistant and non-resistant starch was determined by the mechanism assay kit, which was based on the AOC 2000-2002.02 method and the AAC 2000-3240 method. The assay kit was purchased from Magazine International Limit, Ireland, RSTAR 50 2008. The cooked rice is ground into a paste with a mortar and pestle. Rice paste, 100 milligrams, was reacted with enzymes pancreatic amylase, 3 carbohydrate unit per milligrams, and myloglucosida, 3,300 units per milliliter. Darada Kumbura et al. 2013. The test was carried out in 3 repetitions to get more accurate result.
Okay, so now we are in the results and discussion of our research. So, okay, first is about a comparison of resistant starch content of different types of rice. A total of 6 forms of heating cooling cycle treatment were given to 5 types of rice. Each type of treatment was carried out in 3 repetitions. So, there are total 90 of different test results for resistant starch content. The 5 types of rice were assessed for their resistant starch content and then compared with the fluffier rice as a control. According to the graph, we can see that the yellow rice has the highest average of resistant starch content in all graphs, followed by uduk rice, fried rice, dry rice, and the lowest is fluffier rice. The test result shows that the resistant starch content of fluffier rice and dried rice, both of them had different values, even though they went through the same cooling treatment. Meanwhile, the fried rice resistance starch ability is still below that of Uduk rice and yellow rice, although fried rice has more cooling and heating processes in the manufacturing process. In contrast to Uduk rice and yellow rice, which do not undergo heating and cooling, the water used for cooking is mixed with coconut milk and various herbs and spices. Resistant starch content in white rice. The heating cooling cycle treatment is given to types of white rice that are most often consumed by Indonesians as staple food, namely fluffier rice and dried rice. From the graph, we can know that the fluffier rice newly cooked with 2 times heating cooling cycle has a resistant starch value which is not much different from the room temperature treatment with 1 heating cooling cycles. The fluffier rice with the best resistant starch is obtained by newly cooked, followed by cooling from the fan while stirring, then stored at room temperature from 12 hours, followed by the storage in the refrigerators for 12 hours, then warmed, and then cooled again with the wine while stirred. Dry rice showed an increase in resistant starch at every stage of the heating cooling cycle except at cooling to room temperature for 12 hours plus refrigerator temperature for 12 hours with 1 heating cooling cycles. Same as the fluffier rice, dry rice with the best resistant starch is obtained by newly cooked, followed by cooling from a fan while stirring, then stored at room temperature for 12 hours, followed by the storage in refrigerator for 12 hours, then warmed. After that, cooled again with the wine while stirring. Okay, resistant starch content in fried rice. Like dry rice, fried rice showed an increase in resistant starch at each stage of the heating cooling cycle, except at room temperature cooling for 12 hours plus refrigerator temperature for 12 hours with 1 heating cooling cycle process. Then the best fried rice with resistant starch was obtained through the refrigerator temperature treatment with 2 heating cooling cycles. So, in resistant starch content in Uduk rice, the graph shows that there is an increase of resistant starch in Uduk rice at every stage of the heating cooling cycle process except at room temperature cooling for 12 hours plus refrigerator temperature for 12 hours with once heating cooling cycle process. Uduk rice with the best resistant starch is obtained by pre-cooking, followed by cooling from the fan while stirring, then stored at room temperature for 12 hours, followed by the storage in the refrigerator for 12 hours, then warmed, then cooled again with the wine while stirring. For the resistant starch content in yellow rice, as well as dry rice, the fried rice, uduk rice, and the yellow rice shows increase in resistant starch at all stages of the heating cooling cycle except in the cooling room temperature for 12 hours plus the temperature of the refrigerator for 12 hours with a once heating cooling cycle. Yellow rice with the best resistant starch was obtained through room temperature treatment and refrigerator temperature treatment with twice heating cooling cycles. Okay, so now we are in the comparison of resistant starch by type of treatment. The first is newly cooked treatments. Various types of newly cooked rice are cooled with a fan while stirring, then tested. From the graph, we can know that the highest increase occurred in yellow rice by 22% resistant starch per 100 milligrams, followed by uduk rice by 18% resistant starch per 100 milligrams, and then the smallest increase occurred in fluffy rice at 6% resistant starch per 100 milligrams, and then followed by fried rice at 7% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. And dry rice experienced a moderate increase in resistant starch among other types in these crops, namely 11 resistant starch per 100 milligrams. And then, for the room temperature treatment, various types of newly cooked rice are cooled by stirring and left for 12 hours at room temperature, then test. The graph shows the highest increase occurred in yellow rice by 24% resistant starch per 100 milligrams, while the smallest increase occurred in the fluffier rice and dry rice at 6% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. The moderate increase in this group was found in fried rice by 19% resistant starch per 100 milligrams and followed by Uduk rice at 16% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. Okay, then there is a refrigerator temperature treatment. The various types of newly cooked rice are cooled by stirring and left for 12 hours at room temperature, then cooled again in the refrigerator for 12 hours and finally tested. The highest increase occurred in yellow rice by 24% resistant starch per 100 milligrams, while the smallest increase occurred in Velvia rice and dry rice at 6% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. And the moderate increase in this group was found in fried rice by 19% resistant starch per 100 milligrams and followed by Uduk rice at 16% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. Okay, so now we are in the physicochemical mechanisms in starch, especially in the points of effect of type of process on the formation of resistant starch. Amylose is known to form helical complexes with compounds or complexing agents that have a hydrophobic part. That way, when amylose is reacted with lipids, which have a hydrophobic part, it will form an amylose-lipid complex. This can occur because the lipid hydrocarbon chain interacts with the hydrophobic part of the amylose chain and fills the central cavity of the amylose single helix. Amylose lipid complexes are more resistant to the hydrolysis of amylotic enzymes than amorphous amylose and most type A polymorphic starches. This amylose lipid complex, which is not easily hydrolyzed by enzyme, is known as a type 5 resistant starch. The amount of resistant starch of this type increases in traditional processed rice, namely fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice. This can happen because because in the cooking process of the rice there is the addition of lipids in the form of oil in fried rice and coconut milk in uduk rice and yellow rice. The given lipids then bind to the starch in the rice and make the amorphous levels which are easily hydrolyzed decrease. The more amylose that binds to the oil particles, the more resistant starch is contained. The increase in the amount of resistant starch is evidenced by the test results, which show that the amount of resistant starch in fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice is higher than fluffier rice and dry rice. So, the effect of cooling processes on the formation of resistant starch, we can know that based on the picture, the cooking processes can usually cause the starch to gelatinization. That is irreversible swelling of the starch granules, as shown in the section 2A, and the partial disturbance of the granules shown in the section 2B, which depends on at the level of the treatment applied. Gelatinization occurs because when heated in water, the starch granules become hydrate, swell, and are converted into a paste. When the gelatinized starch is cooled, two ejection starch molecules tend to form a double helix and a network forms. The process referred to in section 3A is known as the amylose retrogradation. Retrogradation results in the transformation from starch paste to a solid gel consisting of a three-dimensional network. If the starch has been refrigerated, is stored for a certain time, it will form an amylopectin molecules bonds which have crystalline structure properties. The amylopectin retrogradation process, as shown in section 3b, can be called process recrystallization. Recrystallization can occur because the linear chains that are attached to the double helix are stabilized by hydrogen bonds, which are resistant to enzyme hydrolyzes. Starch that has uh, that has gone through the retrogradation process and has increased resistance to enzyme hydrolysis is referred to as a type 3 resistant starch. And then the increase in the amount of the resistant starch at room temperature and refrigerator temperature treatment compared to the newly cooked treatment indicated the presence of type 3 resistant starch, which was formed as a result of the treatment. The formation of this type of resistant starch that rises as a result of the retrogradation process occurs in all types of preparations, namely fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and the yellow rice. Okay, so we're now in effect of number of heating cooling cycle on increasing resistant starch. Resistant starch may form during retrogradation or recrystallization of gelatinized starches, particularly amylose. Each successive heating increases the degree of gelatinization of the starch and each cooling promotes more retrogradation. Gelatinized starch will recrystallize to form a more regular solid structure that is more resistant to the action of pancreatic amylase. In each heating cooling cycle, more type 3 resistant starch is formed, which leads to an increase in the percentage of resistant starch content whenever food is repeatedly heated and cooled. Each heating cooling process will cause the starch gelatinization and make it easier for the lipids to bind to the amylase chain to form type 5 resistant starch. The physicochemical processes described above also occurred in samples of fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice, which were given different heating and cooling processes where there is the addition of oil or coconut milk in the manufacturing process. In addition, each cooling process, whether at room temperature or refrigerator temperature, can increase the content of type 3 resistant starch in the sample due to the retrogradation process. This happened in all samples, including the fluffy rice and dry rice. With repeated heating and cooling process, the resistant starch content will be higher compared to not being given the same treatment, namely the newly cooked treatment, which is one of the variations in the treatment in this study. So, we arrived in the conclusions and suggestions based on the research that has been done, where the samples of fluffy rice, dry rice, fried rice, uduk rice, and yellow rice were given 6 types of treatment, which were divided into 3 types of cooling process with 2 variation of heating cooling cycle. The results showed that the treatment has been proved to increase the content of resistant starch in the sample. The highest resistant starch content was obtained by yellow rice samples, which are obtained through through room temperature treatment and refrigerator temperature treatment with 2 heating cooling cycles. This treatment can increase the resistant starch by up to 622% compared to the newly cooked fluffy rice, which is 50% resistant starch per 100 milligrams. Meanwhile, if the rice was not given any treatment, the resistant starch content of dry rice was higher than the fluffy rice. The traditional cooking method that can produce foods with the highest resistant starch content is dry rice processed into yellow rice and followed by cooling from the fan while stirring, then stored at room temperature for 12 hours. then stored in the refrigerator for 12 hours, then warmed for a second time and cooled again in a oven while stirring. The suggestion for this research. We hope for further research can be carried out by increasing the number of types of tests, such as total carbohydrate content test, dietary fiber content test, thermal properties test, X-ray diffraction analysis, as well as in vitro starch digestibility and the glycemic index estimation test, so that the increase and resistance starch that occurs can be studied in various aspects and comprehensive. Thank you. Okay, thank you for your attention. The questions and feedback we welcome it. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Then thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.